is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people who are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. And today we are delighted to be joined by the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Wisconsin, Kleefisch. Please give her a warm welcome. So when we invited the Lieutenant Governor to join us, things were a little different. The governor was running for president. And so I wanted to begin by asking you how your job changed, how your role changed. Does it change back now that the governor is back full time? What was that about?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to answer the question. It was funny because right after he declared his candidacy, I have a newsletter, which, by the way, you can request to be on our list by emailing me at ltgov@wisconsin.gov. ltgov@wisconsin.gov, for those of you who did not get that the first time. And we sent out this newsletter. The title was basically, No, my life did not completely just change. Because I have always felt very passionately about giving taxpayers really good value for their dollar. You will pay for the Lieutenant Governor's office. And so I want to assure that you feel like you're getting a really good deal out of the Lieutenant Governor's office. So we work very aggressively to that end. I travel the state extensively, and we work in a number of different policy areas. A lot of you have probably heard of my work on economic development, or maybe worker training, some work on tax reform, but we actually do a lot more than just those things. We talk about things like infrastructure funding. We talk about the Governor's Task Force on Minority Unemployment. We talk about education, and as you know, Mike, and many of you in this room know, I'm a cancer survivor. We talk about healthcare solutions. And so I've always kept a pretty busy schedule. And so when the governor announced his intention to run for president, I still have a busy schedule. There are still only 24 hours in the day, and I do still have to sleep some of them. And so there are only a certain amount of hours to give, and we continue to give that. Did I give some speeches, perhaps, to groups that maybe I wouldn't have been giving the speech to in the past? Yes, perhaps so. But at the end of the day, it was a wonderful opportunity to continue to communicate the message of the Walker-Kleefisch administration. And now that the governor's home, the band's back together. It's fantastic because we've got a really aggressive legislative calendar. We're going to do some wonderful reform this fall, and we continue to look forward to the future.
We'll talk about a few of those in the next few minutes. I did want to talk to you, though, about how you have viewed the role of Lieutenant Governor, because when you ran for office back in 2010, you probably had your own ideas of what that role could be or should be. How did you decide to focus, as you have, on being, as I think you call it, Wisconsin's job ambassador?
He calls it that. So I think we've probably taken on that role more aggressively than perhaps we would have. When I ran for this job, I remember your extensive coverage of the Lieutenant Governor's race.
We did a lot.
Yes. Okay, you got the back on that. Good job. But the thing about it,
I did a debate. I do want to go on record. We did do a debate on our show.
Okay.
You and Malin Mitchell, if you recall.
that was the other election.
Yeah.
We can talk about that too.
That was the other one.
Yeah, that was the other one. But back in 2010, I had put together a number of web videos, and I talked a lot on my campaign website about the fact that I wanted the Lieutenant Governor's role to be a Chief Marketing Officer role. It's no big secret that in the United States, when you talk about the C-suite of a company, you're seeing a lot of chief marketing officers play a very big role in the future or the legacy of an American company. And the reason why is your marketing officer needs to be deep and wide on all of your product or your service offerings. That means in government that your marketing guy needs to know every agency inside and out. Needs to know what that agency does, the product offerings, not just what tax credits WEDC is offering or what Farm Mentor program our Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection are offering, but and it's also really important that we think big on how we can use federalism, states' rights, and the laboratories of democracy, which are the states of America, to do really neat, creative things in order to help our people. And that's what I want to do. And I think that's that's what I've had a really wonderful opportunity to do, because Governor Walker saw from the very beginning that he had a good balance to make sure that we were partners. And he knew that, me coming from a communications, a background in marketing and media, that I probably was going to need a whole heck of a lot of coaching on dealing with communications and assuring that our message was straight across the board. And so we had to work on exciting policy and government reform. And those are the wonderful things that this office has been able to do over the last 4.5 years, and we're eager to continue.
You've been to China, you've been to Japan. What were the takeaways from those experiences for you as they relate to the state's economic development potential?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because I think this is a really important point for our state in particular. Wisconsin still has a goods-based economy. Our bread is still buttered with industries that maybe are heritage industries, but also are our future industries. Agriculture and manufacturing, they remain the twin drivers of Wisconsin's economy. During the economic downturn of the last several years, Wisconsin's economy took a sucker punch in the gut, and we watched our friends and our neighbors lose their jobs, and in many cases, sometimes their hope. And it was really awful going through that as a state in an economy that didn't have any insulation, didn't have an insurance policy in a recession. I think one of the key things we can do to build that insurance policy to insulate our industries against future economic downturns is by diversifying our customer base. That means talking to new customers. If you only have domestic customers and you're a Wisconsin-based business, you're only talking to about 5% of the world's customers. 95% of the world's customers don't live here. So we have tremendous potential as an export state. One of the ways I think we will win in the future is by diversifying Wisconsin's customer base in agriculture and manufacturing, so that we can take advantage of the different macroeconomic trends going on in other countries, regardless of our domestic macroeconomic trends. That's why we go to places like Japan and Taiwan. That's why I went to China last year, because especially when you come to Southeast Asian business relationships, that face time and building a relationship, sometimes over years, is absolutely essential to getting a deal done. Something that may happen within the United States in a period of 6 months over email and phone calls sometimes can take up to 7 to 10 years in Southeast Asia. So it's really important that we spend some time over there. You'll notice Michigan's Governor Snyder is being very aggressive with his Southeast Asian plan, and he's actually put his lieutenant governor in charge of India. India will have a growing middle class, I predict, in the next several years. I think we have a couple growing middle classes that we can take advantage of that aren't even in our neck of the woods. And so let's build our customer base. Let's diversify it. Let's take advantage of our advantages. Our advantage is that we have done manufacturing and agriculture so well here that it has been our bread and butter for decades.
I gotta ask you a quick question. Did the governor cause any long-term damage in relations between this state and China, for instance, by some of the comments during the presidential campaign where he suggested a state might not be held because he was upset about cyber attacks by China? He had concerns about the way China was conducting itself as a nation. Does that do any damage to relationships that you and the governor have tried to build with that nation?
I would say no, and here is why. I think in China they are actually well aware of some of the issues that they have internationally on human rights and on intellectual property. These are things that I discussed, and folks were actually fairly open about it. Advisors to the People's Congress, when I went there last December, I was surprised when they put us in front of a youth council. Youth was relative, there were some people my age. And they were talking about the fact that they actually send their children to be educated in the United States, not only because they want proximity to, our bright entrepreneurial thinkers and they want really great education, but they also want their kids to breathe freely for 4 years. Can you imagine sending your child away for 4 years with that intention in the back of your mind? These are the things that they would actually talk about, acknowledging for a moment that they don't have their kids in masks because they're about to get a cold, but they have their kids in masks because They're worried about the air pollution. And so I think that there is a generation of Chinese citizens who are very open to acknowledging their place in the world, and they're eager to collaborate on how they can play a bigger role in the world economy. I think we're going to see a little bit more excitement surrounding that movement as you see their GDP change. I mean, just a couple of days ago, I think we saw them drop under 7%. And when that happens, all of a sudden you don't have the gazelle type economy that we've all been talking about for the last several years. And I think you have people who are a little bit more open-minded to collaborative economic solutions. You can have a little bit more certainty when it comes to intellectual property protection, perhaps in the future. A little bit more certainty when it comes to making world agreements, when it comes to conservation and making sure that our people, our workforce, have the same types of protections internationally that they do here at home.
Let's talk about economic solutions on a different scale, back here at home. You mentioned the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and I want to get your take on this. There have been, as you know, a couple of critical audits of the agency, which we should say for the record was endorsed by a number of Republicans and Democrats when it was created. That was the feeling of Commerce secretaries, both Democratic and Republican, that there needed to be changes. But there have been critics of the agency say it's just not getting the job done, it's not having enough oversight and loans. What is your take on WEDC at this moment in time? As a new leader, or we'll have a new leader, what's your take on it?
Well, as Mike mentioned, you all know that we have a leadership transition going on right now. Mark Hogan, who is a well-known name in the Milwaukee banking community, is going to take over the helm there. I think that will make a big difference. The other thing that
In what way do you think it'll make a difference?
Well, because I think you have some folks who are concerned for a moment there about the results of the audits and them being pursued and reported every day in journalistic outlets throughout the state. And I think sometimes someone who has been a business leader in the business hub of the state would instill a certain amount of confidence just by default. So I think that's pretty exciting. The other thing that I think is exciting is that we have put in place the structures and the people and processes by which I think we can be really accountable at the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. Early on, you're right, you did see a lot of audits that people were very concerned about. And with every audit, I think people checked themselves and they checked the practices that WEDC had put into place in order to get better every time. Because ultimately the goal of WEDC was to be better, faster, smarter than our neighbors. That's one of the reasons we created a public-private partnership in the first place. When we had a commerce department, which was very similar to the structure that you're going to see in a lot of states, you had folks in the department regulating the same folks that on the other side of the department, they were incenting to create new jobs. You can see how journalists and taxpayers, business leaders, might get a little concerned about that over time. I think that's why you had both Bill McCutcheon and Corey Meadows saying, we really actually like the idea of a public-private partnership, but now I think what we need to do is we need to take it in overdrive. We need to make sure that we're fully exploring the potential of a public-private partnership. I don't know how far we've really stretched our wings in the private part. What I mean by that is, take for example my trip to Japan. When you go to a meeting with folks from Japan or China, there tends to be a gift presentation at the end of these meetings. Now this may seem like a silly little thing, but when face matters so much in building relationships, you want to be able to give something nice and representative of your state. Well, one of the benefits of having a public-private partnership is you can have companies, friends from the private sector, give WEDC something in order to present on behalf of the state of Wisconsin, something really representative of what we do. Imagine for a second if when I was at a Taiwanese company and they gave me a big cloisonne rendering of Mount Fuji, I had handed back to them something really representative of a Wisconsin legacy company. It sparked in their minds the fact that these companies not only are established in Wisconsin, but headquartered there. Wouldn't it be great to be a part of that customer chain? Wouldn't it be amazing to be a part of that supply chain? So I think as we continue to move forward with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, we need to help people understand the victories that we are achieving, but also we need to fully realize the strength of being a public-private partnership.
So, very briefly, no going back to the old model, no going back to
No going
what
back to
Congress
having the
Department
same
was.
agency regulate as it incent. I think it would be unwise. I think we need to step in the right direction. But I think we also need to make sure that we have the right practices in place. I think we do now, the right leadership in place. And I think with Secretary Hogan and a Senate confirmation, we will. But I can tell you, next week I'm going out to Los Angeles for a Foreign Direct Investment Conference. And I'll be representing Wisconsin in our booth. I'm essentially working outside sales for y'all. And what I'm going to be doing is talking to other foreign companies and foreign countries about bringing their investment dollars here to our aerospace and aviation companies. We want to make sure that people understand that this is a growing cluster in Wisconsin. There are a lot of folks who don't know that we actually have 200 companies operating in the aerospace and aviation cluster here in Wisconsin. 140 of those are Boeing suppliers. We have exciting stories that aren't even being told. And now, with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, we're beginning to tell them. And that is one of the best marketing moves we could possibly make.
Let's talk a little bit about current events and some of the reforms you mentioned at the beginning of our event today. First of all, last week, a number of Republican lawmakers and the governor were excited about some of the news. The state's jobless rate was down to 4.3%. That's the lowest in 14 years. Tax collections were up. About 150,000 private sector jobs have been created since your administration and the governor's administration took office.
Now, why wasn't that headline? Did you notice that?
Well, I did get some media attention, but my question was going to be this. Today, you have the St. Norbert poll comes out, and it shows 57% of people in the state feel we're headed in the wrong direction. How do you explain that disconnect when you look at some of the economic numbers, but people don't seem to, at least some people, and we found some angst in our latest Marquette poll too. There seems to be something there that's not connecting. What is it?
I don't know that it's necessarily reflective of the sentiment that's Wisconsin only.
Well, this one was just about Wisconsin.
Right.
57% thought it was in the wrong direction.
Right, but you have to understand that Wisconsin is a part of a whole that is the United States of America. And I think today you're seeing a difference in where people feel this country is headed. I think there are a lot of people who are really concerned about their security and their safety in this country. I think there are a lot of people who have read a lot about things like income inequality and wage stagnation and don't understand the difference between the two. You know, when you talk about both of those arguments, I think what you're really talking about is upward mobility. One of the things that we don't hear a lot about is the fact that wages are actually up 4.5% year over year here in Wisconsin. I haven't read that article. I read it in my briefing binder. We hear our cabinet secretaries talk about it, but it's not one of those things that's on Facebook every day. Most Americans are now getting their news from Facebook. We need to be talking about the things that matter to our neighbors. And one of the things that matters is how are they compensated and whether we feel that that's really worth the effort that we put in every day, long days. Because we know that we want to do the best we can for our families, but we also know that a greater percentage of our compensation packages are being made up in the benefits part, right? Healthcare. And it's really wonderful that Wisconsin has the second best healthcare in America. But it's also really disconcerting that with the advent of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, care isn't all that affordable. And that's very unfortunate. I think people are starting to feel that pinch. And people are feeling that pinch in their own households. I think this income inequality that our political opponents will like to talk about a lot actually matters a lot less than personal wage stagnation. Income inequality requires a person, a family, a head of household, the family CFO, the one doing the checkbook, to sit there and pine for their neighbor's income. Just worry about what your neighbor's doing instead of what you're up to. I think people would be actually fine with what their neighbor's doing if they felt that they were getting a fair shake. And part of the problem with a fair shake today is we're seeing our paychecks have fewer zeros. And in fact, our healthcare have more zeros.
So it's
We
about,
need to fix healthcare.
it's about wage stagnation rather than income.
Income
You think
inequality.
income inequality is not a
I don't think that
real
that's
issue, or is it?
I don't think that's the correct term to describe how Americans are feeling right now. I think Americans are far more focused on their own families, on what's in their checkbook, than sitting around stewing about what's in their neighbors. I think neighbors in Wisconsin, the people of our state, are really quite aspirational and want great things for their own families and for their own children. And they're concerned about how to get those things for the next generation of their families. And I think they're far less concerned about being jealous of other people.
Would an increase in the minimum wage help deal with the issue of wage stagnation?
Well, we know that that's not the case either. That's not the answer. And here's why. You know, the Wisconsin Restaurant Association did this survey, I think, in the last 6 months. If we did that, we'd lose about 19,000 jobs here in the state. Those 19,000 jobs would tend to be those entry-level jobs. Here's why you can't get rid of entry-level jobs. Entry-level jobs are the ones that prepare our young people for the next set of jobs. Well, why is that essential? Well, during the recession, we saw a lot of folks lose their good-paying jobs, and they went to entry-level jobs. You know, they were working service sector or retail, things that they might have worked when they were in high school or in college or their very first job. And what they saw was not only a lower wage, but they were working underneath their intellectual capacity. They wanted different jobs. They wanted to go back to doing what they were doing before the recession hit. You also have, as a result of that, the highest unemployment rate among young people since World War II. That's what we saw in this country in the middle of the recession. So you had a generation there for a few years that couldn't get those entry-level jobs. Now today, we are experiencing waves of employers telling us every single day that the candidates coming in trying to interview or trying to take jobs at these companies are not ready to go to work. They're lacking soft skills. They're struggling to do basic math. They don't have the first job on their resume that help them to build those essential things. First jobs are incredibly important in order to get second jobs. It's why we have so many programs right now focused on that first job. The mayor and the governor collaborated this summer and have in summers past in order to do the summer jobs program, giving young people opportunities at Boys and Girls Club, or even Boston Store is a wonderful partner for us, because it gives young people those soft skills that you don't get at home. Mom and dad are not going to withhold the allowance from you forever. Mom and dad also can't fire you for not cleaning your room. Your boss can. And coming in day after day with a good hard work ethic and a willingness to be customer service oriented, shake hands firmly, look someone in the eye, know to come back from lunch, are essential skills. And you know, some folks may laugh at the fact that those are so basic, but things are different today than they were even 20 years ago. Soft skills are so essential that NAEP, which is the closest thing that we have to national testing in America for K-12 students, will begin this year to test on character.
Character, grit, curiosity, those kinds of skills, dedication. Let me touch on this, a couple of other topics in the news right now. As we speak, members of the legislature are making changes to the John Doe law, which will make it so that you could not investigate political corruption using the John Doe law. There is talk about significant changes to the Government Accountability Board, to campaign finance laws in Wisconsin. Democrats have characterized those changes as an end to the era of clean, transparent government. I'd like to have you respond to that.
Well, you and I both know, and I think we all know, I'm a journalist at heart. And I think that there is nothing so important as accountability and a bright, shining light on government. That's what the state is for, right? And I can't shake my roots. I think it's essential that we have clean and accountable government every day in the state of Wisconsin. But one of the things that makes government accountable and clean is well-defined laws. Laws that are defined in law and statute, not defined by some guys who are appointed. I think what we have left folks with is uncertainty, instability, and what we need to establish in Wisconsin is stability and certainty. And I think that's where these reforms will go. That's essential.
In what ways would they restore stability and certainty?
Well,
These changes.
I think if you know what collaboration is and the definitions of those, and you move people into the black and white as opposed to helping define gray, that is stability. And as someone who deals with the Government Accountability Board, both as an ex-journalist, but also now on the political side of things, I like the idea of having operations in black and white, pure certainty, so that there aren't questions and we're not constantly having to call and say, hey, is this okay? Or is this okay? We would like to just know.
Those changes you think are good for the state of Wisconsin?
I think certainty and bright, shiny accountability are always good.
You mentioned your years as a journalist. How do you feel about any changes, potential changes down the road to the open records law in the state?
Well, it depends on the changes, right? When we saw proposals for changes earlier this year, obviously the governor was very vocal and being very concerned about that, as was I, because I'm a journalist at heart.
Let me talk to you about what the governor has called for in the last couple of days. He wants to see $200 million in borrowing so that about 5 major road projects in the state can move forward without delays. There are also dozens of other road projects that are affected by this. So here's the question. Should we borrow more, or is it time to have a serious discussion about how we pay for transportation in the first place? Do we raise the gas tax? Do we raise vehicle registration fee? Do we talk about tolling? Should we be having those conversations at the same time?
Well, Mike, I think we've been having this conversation
but we can't make a decision
for a few years
so.
now. And frankly, I think that you will be asked to weigh in on this conversation. And I would love it if you would weigh in on this conversation today. It's really important that those of us with kids in this state have some idea of what our infrastructure is going to look like in the future, but also how we're going to pay for our infrastructure in the future. This problem is not unique to Wisconsin. This is a challenge that we're facing in every state in America and at the federal government level. There are a lot of folks who will kind of default to tolling, say, well, you know, Illinois does it, what about us? Well, you know how we talk about federal money coming with strings attached? Here's the best example of federal money coming with strings attached. Back in the Dwight Eisenhower presidency, Wisconsin accepted some federal highway dollars with the string attached that we would never have tolling in our state. It would literally take an act of Congress for us to be able to toll here. I think that we have a delegation that is eager to be helpful, at least to supply another option for us. But then what about the other options? Well, you saw a couple of studies done over the last several years, and I think we need to have continued and robust discussions about what those studies would mean for the future of Wisconsin, because I know there's a lot of discussion about Back to the Future and the Cubs and the World Series, but the other prediction about 2015 was that we were going to have flying cars. They're not here, Mike. We need to have a long adult talk about infrastructure because we are a goods-based economy. We use our roads, we use our bridges, and not everybody has freight rail in the backyard of their company. So we need to assure that if we do grow our exports in the way I think we can, we have a way to get our goods to market and in an effective.
Came out a week ago or so. Some lawmakers want to have concealed carry on public college campuses. They're concerned about safety. They're concerned about some of the mass shootings we've seen. You're a member of the NRA, proud member. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I should tell you first that I don't have my concealed carry. My husband does. And so this has never been an issue within our household that I've been terribly concerned about. But I have little girls who will grow up and one day hopefully go on to one of our fine technical colleges or colleges here in the state of Wisconsin. And I want them to feel safe. I think it's time for a discussion about what that looks like. And given the fact that this country has seen mass shootings and at places where people cannot use their concealed carry permits, I think it's time for a discussion about that as well. But just as the governor has put taxpayers and constituents, the citizens of the state, in the driver's seat on tax reform and on government reform, I think it's also important that the constituents, the taxpayers, the people of the state are in charge of making decisions like this. And so I think right now the legislature will have to spend a lot of time talking to constituents, develop a bill that one day the governor may see language to, and then he'll have to make that decision.
But not urgent to address this right now in your mind, or?
I would say anytime people are losing their lives, you've got a situation where you've got to deal with it with some urgency.
Yeah, the concealed carry measure though, that's urgent business for the state or not?
People losing their lives is an urgent matter of concern. The violence in Milwaukee, where people are losing their lives, is an urgent matter of concern. Dealing with road accidents, infrastructure, we were just talking about, is an urgent matter of concern. It's why I think it's important to come to government with a sense of urgency, impatience almost, intolerance for a slow pace when you're doing work with people.
Let's talk for a few moments about the next election cycle. And I see a few of the Republicans in the state. Robin Vos, Speaker of the Assembly, is now backing Marco Rubio. With Governor Walker out of the race, have you decided who you're going to support in the Republican primary?
No.
Well, who appeals to you? No, who appeals to you?
I think everyone has interesting and different qualities. I mean, there have been people that I have admired over the years who I don't think will get any traction this time around. There are people that I'm shocked have not lit folks' hair on fire with how exciting their policies are. But rhetorically, they're not as gifted as some of the other orators. So I think it will be very interesting. I don't know that the front runners of today will necessarily be the front runners of a year from today, but I think we're going to have to watch to see how it all shakes out. I do think that this will be more of a foreign policy election, though, than a domestic policy election. I think the last one we dealt a lot with an economy that was not recovering as fast as people had hoped. But I think in this day and age where you talk about the Syrian refugee crisis and you talk about dealing with ISIS and nuclear Iran and do we have a nuclear North Korea, IP and sliding economy in China, the islands of the South China Seas, I mean, we have a lot of foreign policy questions that I think our next president is not only going to have answers for, but will actually have to execute on his or her answers for. And I think that is going to be a really important thing to the American electorate. Because again, now we're talking about the safety and the security of our kids.
ABC News Washington Post poll came out today, shows Donald Trump with a pretty significant lead. Would you be comfortable with him as the nominee for your party?
It's a good question. Donald Trump likes to say that he will surround himself with good people, and that even if he cannot give detailed policy answers today, certainly he will have the solutions ready to be employed and deployed on day one, should he be elected. I guess I like, the security mom in me, and the political demographers redo my brand every election. I was a soccer mom, and I was a Walmart mom, and I was a security mom. The security mom in me wants the certainty of having my candidate know the answers right now. And I watched Governor Walker roll out a number of policy initiatives to frankly very little fanfare. I feel like the journalists, no offense, and no offense to mine for it, are not covering the in-depth policy and are covering more of the personalities. And I get that we like charismatic leaders in the United States, I understand it, but at the end of the day, if that charisma does not also come with good policy chops, I think the American people deserve both.
Let me have you talk about the perceived gender gap in elections, and it tends to work better. That men tend to be more supportive of Republican candidates. Women tend to support Democratic candidates. How do How do you change that paradigm in this election? What could the Republican Party be doing better or differently to change that?
Well, I think it goes back to the answer to your last question, which is talking about the policy versus the personality. You know, I get the reality show, pop culture, place that we live in, but we also live in logic land here in the United States. And if women make 85% of the consumer household decisions in America, and women will be in this presidential election 54% of the electorate, then I think it's absolutely imperative that we engage women where they are, which is the consumer household decision makers of America. Today, 4 out of 10 American households are headed by a female breadwinner. We need to make sure that we are putting our policies in the context of people's lives, women's lives. Right now, I don't think that we do a super job of that.
Could be done better.
I think it could absolutely be done better. And I think one of the ways that we do that is by talking about, you know, infrastructure in the form of the pothole outside your driveway every day. If you hit the pothole and you pay $300 for a front end repair, you know, let's talk about the pothole. How did it get there and why is it still there? Well, I just had a conversation with you about infrastructure funding, whether you felt like I had that conversation with you or not. You know, we talked a little bit about wage stagnation and the difference between it and income inequality. But essentially what we had there was a conversation about healthcare policy and affordability. You know, everyone's been touched by cancer. Most of us have been touched by Alzheimer's or dementia. Why are we not talking about healthcare and choosing our doctors in the context of people's lives? You know, if you can't help your kid with his or her homework when they come home to you every night because your child pushes back on you and says, Mom, that's not how they will accept it, you're doing it wrong, when in fact you actually got the exact same answer in half the time, then we just had a conversation about education reform. We tend not to talk about policy in that way. I think it's a mistake. And I think it's something that we in the Republican Party can do a better job of. I think oftentimes we're really great at driving our policy arguments with data. And I love data. I'm a marketing guy, right? Data drives consumer decisions, and so you need data in order to support your decisions ultimately. But it's how you present that data, I think, that makes all the difference. Democrats are really good at making emotional connections with people. Republicans less so.
Let me squeeze in about 2 or 3 more quick questions, then we'll take questions from the audience. You're doing some work within the Republican Party to try and increase the number of women who are running for elected office. What are you doing specifically to try and address that?
Well, one of the things we do is we actually recruit candidates, and you know,
is it different recruiting a male candidate versus a female candidate?
Statistically, yes. Rutgers University did a study on this a number of years ago. They update it occasionally. It's called Poised to Run, if you want to Google it. And they talk about the gender gap in folks who choose to run for public office. And the gap tends to be people who look at themselves in the mirror and actually see a political candidate staring back. I never would have, when I was doing the news at Channel 12, I never would have told you, as I put on my 2-3 inches of makeup in the morning, that I saw a political candidate one day staring back. It just wasn't something that ever entered my mind. I figured, that was something for other people. But instead of having folks look at themselves thinking, why me? What we need to do is help people reimagine and think, why not me? Because it's essential that we have all voices represented. Because the electorate is all voices, right? And so we know that if women are going to be 54% of the electorate, 60% are college degree seekers these days, they need to be well represented when it comes to making decisions on a public policy level. So it's essential that we encourage them. Interestingly enough, women feel that they have a tougher time raising money, but statistically they do just as well.
So why did you run? You mentioned that you didn't see yourself as that person running for political office. Why did you run?
I have 2 girls, and there is a point at which you realize that yelling at the TV is no longer going to be the best MO for fixing your state and your country. the people on the TV don't seem to hear you. and you know, it's funny, when you work in television, you know, you see the development of those parasocial relationships, right? And you know, as a stay-at-home mom and the owner of a small media marketing company that I had in those 6 years, when I left Channel 12 and before I came here to be your lieutenant governor, there was a lot of yelling at the TV time. And Joel was doing a really great job representing our family, but then it was suggested to me that maybe we needed a me in public policy. And so we talked about it a lot before I did it. I prayed about it a lot before we did it, and ultimately we decided that this was my calling. I didn't come here to Jesus on y'all, but this was something that I really felt that the Lord was leading me to. And I think we've been able to do a lot in the last 4.5 years, but we haven't solved all the problems that the state had, and so there's more to be done.
You mentioned earlier, and I think many people in this room, but perhaps not all, know about your experience fighting cancer. You had cancer when you were running for office back in 2010, colon cancer. Well,
That was timing, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. What did you learn about yourself from that experience?
That I don't take anesthesia well. That I'm still a pretty good investigator. I think one of the things that you do when you're a journalist is you take for granted your skills in quickly finding an answer or quickly locating people. And within a weekend, I was able to find exactly the doc I wanted, hunt down his cell phone number and reach him on vacation and make him agree to take my case. And so I found that I was a pretty decent investigator. But I also think that I learned I was pretty resilient.
Pretty tough.
So live and keep on taking.
So final question, and people, you know, because everybody speculates in politics. That's half of what politics has become today, speculation about who's going to do this, who's going to do that. So everybody wants to know, do you want to be governor someday? Does that job appeal to you? Would you like to be governor at some point, whether it's 2018 or some year in the future?
I agree. I think that speculation game is a lot of fun, and I would hate to prevent anyone here from continuing this.
But surely, if you're the lieutenant governor,
Are you going back at this another time?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I've got many more.
Really? Okay. They're so busy. Look it. I mean, they got so much to do.
But surely, I mean, that's something that has crossed your mind. Which, I mean, I'm not saying that you have to announce here, but I'm saying, wouldn't you certainly have given this some thought?
I'm your lieutenant governor, and you kind, wonderful people have trusted me with that job. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And the people of Wisconsin understand my constitutional duty is succession. I know my job, and I understand my constitutional duty.
Some people think of themselves as really enjoying, you touched on foreign policy earlier, you made a couple references to that. Is that an area of interest for you? I mean, if people look at your future down the road, I assume you're still looking at a future in politics down the road a piece. You're not saying that, you know, I've done this, I've had fun, now I'm going to do something else.
Well, I do think it's really important that when we talk about public service and guys like me who come from the private sector, that we're talking about a visit in public service. And that's always how I have imagined this job and this world of government. I come from the private sector. I imagine myself one day going back there. My visit thus far has been 4.5 years. I've really enjoyed it because I feel like we've been able to do good work. I feel like we've been able to change some lives. You know, there are days when Daniel, my chief of staff, will email me something, a constituent reply to a letter or a problem solved, and he'll use an expression that I like to use, which is good day at government. I want to have more good days at government, but I would like to leave government where there are more good days than flawed days. I want government to be more efficient. I want government to be a better value. We're the one entity that you don't get to pick whether you buy from us. We're your service provider, whether you like it or not. And not only are you our customer, you're our shareholder. And so you should be able to keep us accountable from both angles. And why wouldn't you? And so I want that accountability, and I want to continue to work hard as your lieutenant governor, as long as I'm blessed to do so.
Has the governor given you any indication of whether he wants to run for another term? He says, I'll do this the remaining 3 years, and giving you any indication?
Well, I think that those conversations are probably left best between the governor and me.
Okay. Let me take questions from the audience. We started a couple minutes late, so we will go just 2 minutes past, so we'll wrap things up at 1:17 today. Raise your hand. If you're in the seating bowl, press down on the rim, not on the ball, but keep your finger down on the rim so we can hear your questions. If you're in the back and you have a question, the gentleman in the red shirt with the microphone is Ryan. He'll come over and put the microphone in front of you so we can all hear your question. And please, as we always say at our events, no speeches, just questions. That would be great. Okay? So, you have a question? Okay.
Regarding the $200 million that the governor has just requested for the road building, if we had taken and could still take the Medicaid expansion, the vascular expansion, we would have that money and a lot more. Could you please comment on that?
Thank you for the question.
Sure. Well, you all remember when it was a statewide choice by taxpayers to segregate, to truly isolate our transportation fund. And so what we're talking about here is two very separate, segregated pots of money. When money comes from the federal government, sometimes, as I mentioned, there are strings attached, and oftentimes money that is intended for a certain purpose needs to remain for that certain purpose. And we also are very concerned, as you might imagine, for that string associated with any Medicaid dollars to be pulled back. The same way our opportunity to explore different transportation options was pulled back. We want to make sure that the taxpayers of our state are protected. And the way we protect them is by assuring that we can do things on our own effectively and efficiently, giving you a good value.
Let me take another question. Please raise your hand. Yes, and press down on the rim. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you were talking about minimum wage and it's all soft skills, entry, level, that people would get the minimum $7, $8 because they're going to work their way up.
Sometimes.
Okay, I mean, I have a mother-in-law in an institution or a facility, I have grandchildren in daycare. They're minimum wage. And when you have minimum wage today, people come and go, come and go, come and go. And those are things that I value, that I would like to keep people that do good jobs and stay in those and not using this entry level.
I think now you're specifically talking about maybe certified nursing assistants and maybe daycare teachers?
Anybody that works in those, in daycares for the younger.
Daycares and maybe nursing homes, is that the other one you're talking about?
Daycares for the young and the old, but no matter what we're doing there.
Sure.
I think they're so important, and I hate them to be looked down upon as entry-level jobs.
I agree with you, and I don't think that those are entry-level jobs. I think that healthcare field jobs can be amazing careers. I think when it comes to our free market and the idea that we pay for not only good quality but good value is really essential, especially when it comes to healthcare. I'm going to equate this to agriculture, and I know that that's going to feel like a weird comparison for a moment, but out west, there is a berry crop that this year 30% dropped to the ground. It's because the farmers could not find enough workers to pick strawberries. Shockingly, there were a lot of farmers that rented incredible homes for workers, raised wages, $3 an hour, provided extraordinary health care, but people still didn't want to do the jobs for the price they were paid. One of the good things about the pressures of the free market is if you are not finding the right people to do the jobs, you will either lose money on the back end or you will lose your job or your company completely. And there's only so many seasons or years, fiscal years, you can continue to lose workers without losing your customers. That applies a different type of free market pressure. You've got to raise wages, which is exactly what we're seeing in agriculture right now. I think we will also see something similar in healthcare in the future. But we've got to make sure that people are the ones making the choices and not government. Because people, when they have choices in their own healthcare, they will choose places like you have chosen, of high quality, where you value the workers. So that the workers, in turn, know their value, and you're willing to pay what they demand in order to make sure that they're providing the care that you feel that your relatives deserve. Free market pressures in a healthcare scenario are essential.
This is education, and I try to daycare for the young and the old. That is low. That's $7, $8 an hour. That's your.
Well, that's why in our daycare program, you know that we switched to the Young Star program, where what they do is they rate daycares from 1 star all the way up through 5 stars. And in order to get one of those highest 5-star ratings, what we've done is we have asked for folks to make sure that they have the type of pre-K education field experience that is required to get one of those ratings, but we've also granted scholarships so that people could get that type of education.
Let me take another question. Let me go back here, this gentleman, if you can hang on a second.
What do you think the most important issue right now facing Wisconsin?
The most important issue facing Wisconsin right now is the number of open jobs we have laid over the top of our labor market participation rate. We hit 100,000 open jobs on our totally free Department of Workforce Development job search website called jobcenterofwisconsin.com last Friday. There are a lot of people, post-recession who would jump up and cheer because that's totally the opposite of the challenge we were facing a few years ago, right? But at the end of the day, 70% of our employers, the job creators, say that their biggest concern is our skills gap. That means that they are not finding people with the skills they need in order to meet the demands of their customer base. So when you lay those two numbers over each other, our labor market participation rate, which is about 68.4%, the fact that we have 100,000 open jobs, and we tend to only have about 41,000 people per day on unemployment insurance, you can see that we have about 60,000 jobs that can't possibly be filled by folks who are on unemployment. We need to get people who are currently on the job search sidelines back into the work search world. Because a lot of the jobs that are posted on jobcenterofwisconsin.com are careers, family-sustaining wage jobs. That's exactly the type of job that we want to promote and grow in the state of Wisconsin. We don't want people to experience any sort of wage stagnation. Not only do we want the compensation package as a whole to grow, but we want wages to grow at the same time your benefits and your insurance grows. We want people to live lives of prosperity here, lives where you can realize your American dream. In order for that to happen, we need folks to get the training that makes them essential players, essential talent assets in today's economy.
Let's take another question. Let me go right here.
I appreciate what you said about expanding our customer base to help our economy here. You've spent time in China and in Southeast Asia. Where do you see the biggest potential for capitalizing on our growth there, expanding our customer base? Where's the biggest market for us to explore?
Well, the biggest growing middle class right now would be China. And so you've got wages increasing at the same time you have energy costs increasing, which are actually two really great market forces for us. The only adverse effect is, of course, the strength of the dollar right now for our export potential. But I think we can overcome that with the fact that in Wisconsin, at least, we have a type of certainty and stability that other states cannot offer in the form of our trajectory for our taxes. You know, our taxes reliably are going down, and the governor has promised they will continue to go down. And also our manufacturers and agriculture tax credit. Reliably, our makers and our growers know that their tax liability will be at almost nothing by the time that's fully phased in 2016. That gives them more resources. As we know, small business owners tend to do more resources to farm right back into their businesses, to either make new capital investments, to hire more people, or make acquisitions, be they real estate or another company that they can absorb. That creates a lot of economic potential for us.
Let me take one or two more questions. Yes, sir? Just hold your finger on it.
Oh, I keep my finger on.
You got it.
Hi, Peter Slaby. Here I'm a lifelong resident of Wisconsin and admittedly a aging, seasoned citizen. Now, 5 years, well, see, back in 2011, Scott Walker was using that motto or that term about Wisconsin is open for business, or words to the effect of business means business, et cetera, et cetera. Now, up to present day, going on 5 years later, I've been collecting and putting a lot of dots together, creating a picture that to me tells a story. And what it says to me, just one old guy here, that currently the Wisconsin regime is practicing a form or Wisconsin version of neoliberalism on steroids. Now, I was wondering, Mr. Kleefisch, if you would agree with me, or perhaps not, and why?
Peter, I think that what Wisconsin is practicing right now is taxpayers regaining their opportunity to drive Wisconsin's economy and policy. We see a lot of government reform. We've seen it over the last 4.5 years, and we'll continue to see it in this legislative session in a good way, so that not only are journalists able to keep Wisconsin governments accountable, but we're also able to grow the economy in a way that future generations, Peter, maybe relatives of yours, will continue to reap the benefits from for years and years. Wisconsin is known for many things, but in the future, I hope Wisconsin is known for being the hotbed of economic opportunity. Not only the place where wages grow exponentially year over year, but also a place where entrepreneurship is not just something we want, but something that we're known for. And we're already becoming known for it. Chicago Biz, Cranes.com, did an article about 3 months ago now, talking about the fact that they have a lot of young trends like our tax trajectory, but also the fact that we have no unfunded pension liability, and therefore government's not going to come after their bottom line in order to pay for promises made by politicians in the past. But they're also taking advantage of low cost of living and opportunities to be a big fish in a small pond. Those small business owners will create between 60 and 80% of new jobs. If these are things we know, this is the data that drives decisions, we need to take a look at the data and help policymakers pull and push the levers that makes the data work in the right direction. Let's make sure that we're spending a lot of time on helping the folks who will create the jobs and helping the people in those jobs to create the wealth that Wisconsin families earn and deserve.
I'm going to wrap things up right there, as I promised. 1:17. I'm doing okay. Before we go, just want to mention a couple of things for those of you who've been good enough to join us today. Upcoming events next Wednesday, a week from today, former Congressman Petri and Obie will be with us. Talk about Washington and what's working and what isn't, and how things have changed and all of that. The following day, we have a morning-long conference on the future of the American Public Library. I feel like it's going to be very good, and I hope that maybe some of you can set aside some time the morning of next Thursday to join us. And then the following week on November 5th, You can check our website to make sure on that, law.marquette.edu. We're going to have Peter Fagan, the new president of the Milwaukee Bucks, will be with us. More events to come, but for now, thank you very much for your interest, your attention, and please thank